Imagine, you've been shopping for what seems like forever for the perfect car and you finally find one. It's exactly what you were looking for, and since it took you so long to find it, you don't want to let this one get away, so you overpay for it. A lot. You go to meet up with your buddy to show off your snazzy new hot rod, and the first thing he has to say is, "You know this thing's been painted before, right?" And as a matter of fact, this is exactly what happened to me with one of my vehicles, and it can all be avoided by following a few simple steps that I'm going to share with you guys today. Only one of these vehicles has never had any kind of paintwork done to it, unlike the other two. Let's see if you guys can guess which one it is. Go ahead and comment down below. So how can you tell if a vehicle has ever had paintwork done to it? Well, for starters, you can go to my website and read the article about it. Shameless plug. This is not an orange, it's a lemon. But orange peel looks very similar to this. You can see the texture on that. Orange peel is a very common thing in the detailing and body shop world, and it's just a level of texture that remains when the paint hasn't been sanded down all the way to perfection to like a mirror-like finish. It's a very common sign that a car has been repainted. Not necessarily if it has orange peel, but if the texture doesn't match on all of the different panels. So say on my MR2 here, if the whole car is perfectly flat with no orange peel at all, but this one door has a bunch of texture in it, you know that that doesn't line up, it's not consistent. You're gonna want to investigate a little bit further there. Blend marks are what happens when a panel has been painted and then the body shop will kind of feather the color in with the adjacent panel so that you don't have a straight cutoff line like right here where this is fresh paint and a little bit off in color, and then this is the original paint, say from like 20 years ago. They'll actually blow it in and blend it in a little bit, and so a blend line might look like a little bit of a hazy spot. It won't look like a sharp cutoff, it'll just be kind of, well, it'll be kind of feathered in a little bit. A real telltale sign that a vehicle has been repainted is if the color match is off. And so on the MR2 here, these side skirts are actually aftermarket. They didn't come like this from the factory. So this is factory paint up here, and these side skirts were repainted. And they were done by the previous owner of the car. I wasn't involved with that, but the color is not quite right. And depending on the lighting, it'll change whether it looks proper or not. Like right now, I think on camera, it actually doesn't look like it's off at all on sort of a cloudy day like this. You have to make sure that you look at it in all different lighting situations to make sure that it matches properly. Here you can see that the side skirt is definitely off a little bit. Now, just because you have something painted and you're trying to match it up with factory paint doesn't mean that the color is always going to be off. Case in point, I actually had my buddy John paint the front lip on this car, and as you can see, he nailed the color match on that perfectly. So a good body guy can match the color perfectly. This thing has had a bunch of paint work done if you've been following along with my little project here. So a lot of it is original paint, but this is a brand new front bumper. The front bumper has been painted. This driver's side front fender has been painted. And then this door and the passenger bedside are original paint, but off of a different truck. So they actually match pretty decently. But depending on the lighting, you can see this fender does not match this door. It's more of a bluer shade, and this is a little bit more of a yellowish shade, and same with the fender flare. The flare and the door match together. So if you walk up to this truck, you're thinking about buying it, and you see this, you need to start asking questions about what happened on this corner of the vehicle. Now, in the body shop's defense that painted this is kind of my fault. I was trying to do this as cheap as possible, and so I gave them the panels off of the truck to paint and do their best with color matching, and they even told me straight up, once you bolt it back on the truck, bring it back and we'll blend it into the door, and I just never did that. So not really their fault. Silver is a really tough color to match. And sometimes you get lucky too, because the tailgate on this truck is the same shade as the front fender and the front bumper, but because it's not directly beside one of the original painted parts, there's no like clear cutoff, it doesn't stand out. It looks like it's perfectly matched. Guys, I want to hear your stories of the worst vehicles that you've been screwed over on in the past, ones that you've bought. And go ahead and comment below on what you think is like the worst experience you've ever had buying a car. You're also going to want to keep an eye out for tape lines, because a lot of times a cheaper paint job, they're not willing to pull all of the trim off of the vehicle. And so what they end up doing is just taping it off with painter's tape to not get any paint on it. And what you end up with then, I don't know if this will show up on camera here, but there's a tape line here because there's kind of two different levels of paint right on that very edge. And sometimes it just kind of looks like there's a little bit of wax or compound or something stuck in there, but a lot of times it actually is a hard edge of new paint over top of old paint, and that's just where the tape came up to. To do it properly, you need to pull all the glass out, all the trim off, and those are, I mean, $10,000 plus paint jobs, so that's a telltale sign that somebody has not only had it painted, but kind of saved a little bit of money on doing it a quicker way. Next up, we're looking for inconsistencies in paint depth, and you're going to want to use one of these paint depth gauges right here. Let me focus here. There we go. Now the thing with these gauges is I'm not concerned with the number itself, the reading that they come out with. I'm more concerned with, again, consistency. I want to see that every panel of a vehicle should have a very similar paint depth reading to each other. And it doesn't have to be exact, but my rule of thumb is usually like between, say, 10 or 20 microns. I usually keep this in measuring in microns, but you want to go through and you want to measure every panel, and this will make a little beep noise when it gets the reading. The polarizer on the lens is not helping me with showing the screen here. Now I'll throw out a link to this gauge or one like it on Amazon. They're really easy to find. I think they're about 200 bucks, no big deal. You can spend thousands of dollars on these paint depth gauges if you want to, but realistically, I still feel like even the really expensive ones are not perfectly accurate with the reading that they'll give you. So I feel no need to spend big dollars on one. One of these cheaper ones, again, 200 bucks. You're looking for how the panels compare with each other and not the actual number itself. So I've had plenty of times when I've been detailing or polishing a car and, you know, I'm taking a bunch of measurements with this guy right here, and say the hood is measuring 120 microns, this fender is measuring, let's say, 127, and this door is 119, and then the back quarter panel is like 700. Hang on here. Something's going on. It's time to start asking questions. Something has happened with that panel. So I'll try to keep this kind of short and sweet for you, but the way that it works is factory paint is almost always thinner than aftermarket paint, like from a body shop, and that's because most cars from a factory are painted by a machine, and that machine is like perfectly calibrated to spray the least amount of paint on a vehicle as possible and consistent as possible, mainly because they don't want to waste money on excess paint. Body shops, they do it by hand typically, and there's always human error, so there's always inconsistencies where it's not a calibrated machine. It's a guy, sometimes with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, spraying down each panel one at a time. And so that's one reason why an aftermarket paint job will be thicker. Another reason is body shops will often use a filler underneath, like Bondo or something, if they're filling in imperfections and stuff like that. And so that's typically what I find is the main reason why I would see a really high reading with a paint depth gauge, is because there's some filler underneath and then an aftermarket paint job over top. The next thing you're going to want to watch out for is overspray. And I don't have any overspray on any of my vehicles because it's really easily removed with a clay bar. But you want to keep an eye out for, it's gonna look like a dull spot, almost like a sanding mark, and it'll be rough to the touch, and you'll be able to hear your hand, like your fingers, glide over top of it, and that's overspray. So that's going to be like, say, if they repainted this hood and it was just the hood, they weren't doing any of the rest, they're going to tape off like this fender and all the surrounding areas. So they might have gotten lazy and maybe they didn't tape off up here on the roof. And if you're touching here, you're going to go, oh wow, that's really rough. That's probably overspray, because if you've seen a vehicle get painted, there's just like a cloud of spray and solvents and stuff in the air. And you'd be amazed at what it'll attach itself to. It can find vehicles from across the parking lot sometimes. And again, the overspray itself is not a problem. It comes off really easy with a clay bar, but it is a sign that a vehicle has been to a body shop. The next sign that a vehicle has been repainted is missing emblems or stickers. I think the Tacoma is probably the best example for this one. So imagine you're going to have this door repainted, right? Well, this Tacoma emblem is obviously going to have to come off. And there's a lot of people that either don't like the look of it, or again, they're just trying to save money and they don't bother putting it back on. Sometimes it'll break when you're trying to take it off if it's really brittle. So if something like that is missing, especially if like this door has a Tacoma badge but the other door doesn't, then you need to start asking questions. And as a matter of fact, this exact truck is a perfect example, because you'll notice there's no badges on this tailgate. And that was by choice. I didn't want to put them back on. This is a brand new tailgate. I left like the Tacoma SR5 V6 stuff off the back there. Now with these Tacomas, if they're a TRD Sport or a TRD Off-Road, they're going to have a sticker right back here on the bedside. And so if that's missing, and it is indeed a TRD Off-Road or a TRD Sport, that's a sign that it's had some paint work done on this side. It can also just mean that somebody thought they look a little bit corny or a little bit tacky and they just peeled them off on purpose. There's a lot of people that debadge their vehicles for fun just because they think it looks better. So the last thing to look out for is signs of a lazy body shop. And this might mean a few different things. There could be sanding marks left in the paint that haven't been polished out properly. You want to keep an eye out for, say, little drips or burnt edges, because they do have to polish the paint afterwards. And you'd be surprised, a lot of body guys are great at laying down paint and they're awful at polishing. Speaking of polishing, they might leave holograms behind, because a lot of old school body guys are adamant that they only use a rotary polisher. And that'll leave behind holograms and buffer trails if they don't follow up with a finishing product and apply it with like a dual action machine. That might just be a sign of a hack detailer, or it could be a body shop. You also want to take a look and feel inside the doors, because you know, somebody might go to the bother of making sure everything is perfect on the outside, but make sure you feel these edges. This should be nice and smooth from the factory, right? But a body guy that's trying to get the job done quick is not going to take the time to sand in here and make sure there's no drips and no rough spots. So if this doesn't feel smooth, if it feels rough, that might be repainted. So why do we care if a vehicle has been repainted? Well, for one, it'll definitely change the value of it. It isn't worth as much if it doesn't have the factory paint. And it can also uncover a history of the vehicle's past. Maybe it's been in an accident. Maybe it's had rust repaired on it. And if a panel has had rust on it before and somebody grinds it off or cuts it out, if that panel is contaminated, there's a good chance that it's going to come back. It's kind of like cancer in humans. The best way to remove rust is to remove the whole panel and swap it out. So that can be a sign that they just chopped out a spot on one panel and it's going to rust again soon. In the case of this Tacoma here, this poor old girl had a dent in every corner of it when I got it. It had a big dent in the front fender, on the door, over here on the passenger bedside over there had a huge dent in it. The tailgate was all smashed up and rusted. Chances are you probably wouldn't know that by looking at the truck and what it looks like right now. Here on the MR2, I first found that there was a blend mark right here. I'm not sure if it's going to show up on camera or not. It looks like it's been feathered in here, and I thought, well, wait a minute, let me look a little bit closer. Then I found this tape line right here. Well, that looks like, again, there has been some kind of body work done right here. The final proof, if you come over here, guys, I noticed it when I put these Volk wheels on it. You can see how flush the rear bumper is with the wheel. If you look at it from this angle, it's straight, right? If you come over here on this angle, on this side, can you see the little gap where the tire is right here? This has been pushed in a little bit. And so, yes, that's right, guys. This is the car that 19-year-old Canadian forehead overpaid for. Still worth it, though. And if you haven't been paying attention throughout the whole video, process of elimination, the 4Runner is the only one that has never had any type of paintwork on it. This is all the original Shadow Gray mica paint. Aside from this aftermarket heritage-style grille that I got from Trail Runner Customs, but that doesn't really count, right? So those are some great ways to tell if your vehicle has been repainted or had any kind of paintwork done to it whatsoever in the past. Hopefully that helps you out. Make sure you guys don't get screwed over if you're shopping for a new vehicle. It's worth doing these little tests and checks to make sure. If you want to keep watching, I'll put another video on the screen here for you now. Go ahead and binge, and I will catch you on the next one. See ya.